Okay, so let's go ahead and get going today in our third session of objects. We've got a lot ahead of us to go through in our discussion. Actually, before we build our game called Critter Attack, which is going to be so awesome, we need to finish off one last thing in our discussion about strings, or the string object, before we can move on. Before I do that, I wanted to kind of give you a quick idea as to the road ahead for this whole unit. There are, as you know, based on those first tables I gave you, there's an awful lot of information in this unit and these several different recordings. So I broke them out for your convenience so that you can kind of muddle through them, the appropriate ones that you need to go through. In this session, we're going to be talking about the data object, the function object. We're going to look at and talk about movie clip objects as well. There's an object, if you can imagine that, and we'll look at what it means for implicit object instantiation. With the movie object, there's a whole list of objects that we're going to discuss, and then there's global movie objects that we'll discuss as well. And then several methods with each of these objects. I just wanted to forewarn you. We have to discuss the mouse object. Obviously, that's going to be an integral part of our games that we create, and various methods associated with that. There's a selection object, of course, the stage object. The stage is certainly has a lot of properties, and there's a list of descriptions there. And we have to think about the scaling aspect of the stage and various objects. Then we have a stage listener, which is an important element for our games. Then we have instance movie objects that we'll look at, with the color object, the button object. We need to learn a little bit about how color is represented with hexadecimal number representation and versus a decimal number representation, and various methods associated with that, like setting the color with set RGB and get RGB. There are transform tools with colors. Then we need to look also at the movie clip object and movie clip properties, and there's several properties. Remember, properties are something that actually describes something. That's probably the best way to look at it. Like, what describes you? Is it your blue eyes, your blonde hair? That is something that would physically describe you, and your great appearance, of course. And then, so properties are similar to that in programming, that properties describe something. Okay, so we'll look at properties that way. There are several methods in movie clips. I'm sure that's beyond what we'll be able to cover in this session, but just to kind of give you some insight, there are so many more things that we need to do in the road ahead. I'm not going to go into everything, but let's get busy and get started with it. And I think you'll be glad you did. Once you get through all of this, then we're really well on our way to writing some cool programs with code, and you'll at least have an arsenal in your back pocket to pull from when you need to do some special things. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the string to lowercase and string to uppercase methods. Both of these methods will return a string that has each element converted to either upper or lowercase, depending on which method you're going to be using. So here's an example. Again, these are best described with these examples. So here's a new object, a new string object assigned to a string variable reference of a function reference of S. And the string says, "Hello world, I'm happy to be here." Now, the simple method to change it to uppercase would be S dot to uppercase. And the same thing with lowercase. Go ahead and do that and see how that actually works within your code. So here's this example that I went ahead and put into Flash. You can see that they both work as you would expect them. We take this string that has a mixed case of lower and uppercase, and we need to change it to uppercase. We just go ahead and apply this method based on our object that we created called S, and also to lowercase. Now, why would you need to do that? For example, so if you're integrating some of their data that, say, a user is bringing into your game, say they're typing in a string of information, like say it's their username or whatever, to work with some rules of databases and whatnot or other programs, you know, even in our code, in ActionScript and C#, etc., everything is case sensitive. So to make things consistent across, you know, and workable, we would typically take something that you receive from input from the user, say a text string, and you change it to either lowercase or uppercase. In most cases, probably to lowercase, although I've seen it the other way. So this is a pretty nifty little thing to know about. So just by creating this object, this string object, we can actually control how we receive that data. We can convert it to upper or lower case. Okay, so we need to briefly look here at the data object. The data object, as you could well imagine, is just full of methods that's really designed to give us information about the local date and time. And the ActionScript dictionary in itself is really an excellent reference to learn more about this particular object. And then, in a nutshell, basically you create a new data object instance, and then you call methods on that particular instance. So really, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it here. It's kind of a waste to spend time and pages talking about the data object for gaming, and especially where ActionScript does such a good job in describing this. So I'll just leave you guys for that task to do on your own. It's just enough to say that by creating this new data object instance, then you just basically call methods on that particular instance. So enough said about that. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this next object that we're going to look at or address here is the function object. It's something that kind of blows your mind a little bit when you first think about it. It's an object that's going to allow us to encapsulate a function. So similar to the wrapping of a Boolean string or a number, a function object can wrap a function for us. It's not used very often, but again, that doesn't mean that there isn't a purpose for it. What we do is basically we're going to instantiate the function object just like any normal instance object with the new keyword and its constructor call. And here's an example of creating a function object right below here, where we have f equals new function function trace high. Okay. So the call method is basically it's used to call a function. Now, yeah, of course we already have a way to call a function, but see, this gives us another way. It's essentially a way to get an object to call one of its methods on another object. So in other words, if we define a method on an object and we say it's object A, and we want to call it as if it were a method of object B, we could use the call method to do that. So here's the general form for the call method, shown right here. Just realize that the function is called on a function object instance. The return type is shown to be a return value. And that's because it can be anything that the function returns. It could be a number, Boolean object, functions, void, so on and so forth. The first argument to the call is the object upon which the function should operate. So that argument is followed by individual arguments to call the function with. So there can be anywhere from 0 to more arguments as usual. So let's look at this with script and see it in action here. Let's see. Sorry about that. So go ahead and grab this this code. I know it's kind of weird looking, but let's look at it anyway and have some fun with it. Go ahead and put this in Flash. So from putting this into Flash, let's go ahead and I need to fix up our quote marks. Let me get that done first. Okay, so this is really kind of some funky looking code here. So let's take a look at it kind of closely. First, what's happening is that we're instantiating a new function object called f. Okay, that makes sense. And we're giving it an anonymous function, which is kind of weird, right? In this constructor. So this constructor right here says, here's our anonymous function. And so we know that it is a function object. All right, and there's our anonymous function. And basically it's going to move, when we give it this anonymous function in the constructor, which moves it a variable number of pixels to the right, it'll add the argument amount to this dot underscore x. Okay. Then we create two new movie clip instances with attached movie. One is a ball and one is a square. It is basically assumed that these exist as symbols in the library and have been exported for ActionScript. We've got to make sure we have those symbols there as well. And then finally, we attach the function f to the ball clip under the method named slide. Okay, now comes the tricky part here. All right, we call a method of the function object called call, which calls a function as a method of the first argument. In this case, that's square. Even though the function adds to this dot underscore x, and the function is attached as a method of a ball, because we use the call method and have supplied a reference to the square clip as the first argument. So it's actually the square clip that moves to the right. Okay? Now that should seem kind of weird to you, but in fact you'll probably never have a need for the call method. And if you do, you should seriously check your design if you're having to use that. This function object probably won't even exist if in ActionScript if it wasn't something that was required by the ECMA 262 standard. So if you fully don't grasp this method at all, don't worry about it. We're really not going to use it. I'm only explaining it because you'll have a hard time finding a good explanation really anywhere else. So that's the bottom line with this strange bit of code call that we're using here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this code to see how it actually works, as strange as it is. And there we have it, the ball in our square. So then we have this function called the apply method. This is a method here for the function. It's just basically another function that allows us to call a function on an object as if it were a method of that object without the function actually being attached to the object. So let's take a moment to take a peek at this one. So the general form of this one is shown as on the slide. So this is basically is identical to the function call, except that instead of each argument being its own parameter to the call, the apply method uses what it calls an arguments object to give arguments to the function. So this arguments object is just an array containing all of the arguments. In addition to the apply and the call methods, the function object defines one property, prototype. And so this property is used in inheritance, which we'll discuss much more in detail in future lessons. Okay, so now we're getting into something that's pretty powerful and also equally as important. It's the object. And many aspects of this object affect every other object type in Flash. And its importance can't be overstated. So much of the object's power comes from inheritance, and as you know, that's not covered until later. So even without that, there are some really neat things that we can do with this object. So first, what we need to do is we need to instantiate one. So let's take an object with the, not the numerical 0, that's just a regular character 0, or O, equals new object. So we do that first, and then secondly, what we're going to do is we're going to attach some properties to O. Okay, so here's the X and Y property. We're giving it a value. We're setting the scale of this object. And then we're going to attach an object to it. So we're going to attach our ball, and we'll explain basically how this all works. Go ahead and put that in right now, and we'll continue talking about this. So there's some things that we need to realize is because O is an object and not a movie clip. Remember that. The properties X and Y and X scale, they're not going to do anything special. In other words, they don't mean something like they do on a movie clip, right? But we can now use this object as an initialization object in our attached movie calls. So if you remember way back when we talked about creating instances dynamically and we created the button menu, you had the general form for attached movie. You could give an optional fourth argument, and I said we'd talk about that later in our attached movie call. Well, now that we can create an object, we're ready to do that. After setting up the O object in the previous script, here's what we can do. So I can put in attached movie call, and here's the name of our movie clip, the new name of the movie clip, here's the depth, and the fourth option was actually the name of our new object, which is O. So Flash takes every property of the object O and makes properties of ball that match. So that means that the ball has its X changed to 100 and Y changes to 100, and then the X scale has changed to 50, which allows us fast and easy initialization of movie clips. Now, in addition to this, because O is still a valid object, we can use it again in the initialization of other ball clips. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty powerful. So let's take a look at the result of this little bit of code. Pretty nifty, huh? Okay, so let's talk about a thing called implicit object instantiation. So remember when we created an array without the new keyword? If you remember that or no? Well, that's possible with several instance objects, including the object. So the general form of an implicit object instantiation is shown here, where we have P1 colon value 1, P2 value 2, Pn value n, etc. Essentially, it's a code block set off with curly braces and containing a set of properties. This property list is comma separated, okay, with each property name being assigned its value with a colon. So that means that we could create an object implicitly with this script here. So we've got O equals underscore X 100, the Y property is 100, set the X and Y scale, etc. Okay? So that is a much more elegant way of writing what is shown at the bottom. So the one at the bottom is pretty extensive, where we had to go O equals new object, blah, blah, blah. So obviously, what would you rather do? Write this or write this? Okay. Actually, you can do both, and both types can be used. Depending on what's more intuitive and convenient at the time for you, either one would work. So it just depends, I guess, on what you're doing. Okay, so that concludes all the sections here on core objects. We're ready to move on in our next unit to our big group of objects, which is the movie group. And that's a kind of a huge unit, so I'm going to reserve our time for that in our next session. So that concludes session 3. So we look forward to seeing you joining me back here in our discussion of objects on session 4. We talk more and more about movie clip objects and the huge list of various methods and things that happen with movie clips. Obviously, that's a big part of Flash and utilizing Flash, and it's not as difficult as you think. There's just a lot there. So enjoy your evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here in virtual space.